The blood-red dust on Evangeline's torn dress told everyone in Silver Ridge, Wyoming, exactly what kind of woman she had become, and the townspeople made certain she knew their judgment with every whispered word, and turned back as she stumbled down the main street on that scorching July afternoon in 1872. She had nowhere to go, no family to return to, and no hope left in her 22-year-old heart after 3 months of captivity with the outlaws who had raided the stagecoach that was supposed to carry her to a teaching position in Cheyenne. The marshal had rescued her 2 days ago, but the rescue came too late to save her reputation. The outlaws were dead now, shot down in a hail of bullets. But Evangeline felt just as dead inside as she walked through town seeking any kind of work, any kind of shelter, anything to keep her from starving on the streets. "We do not employ ruined women here," the general store owner had said, his face twisted with disgust. The boarding house owner had slammed the door in her face. The restaurant owner had actually spat at her feet. Nobody wanted a woman who had been with outlaws, no matter that she had been their prisoner, their victim. In the eyes of Silver Ridge, she was tainted goods, worthless, without virtue or value. Evangeline sank onto the wooden steps of the closed smithy, her legs finally giving out beneath her. She had not eaten in a day and a half. The marshal had given her a few coins, but even his eyes had held that same judgment, that same knowledge that she was no longer respectable. She clutched those coins now, knowing they would not last long, knowing that no amount of money could buy back what she had lost. "You cannot sit there," a sharp voice said. Evangeline looked up to see a woman in a fine blue dress, her face pinched with righteous anger. "This is a decent town. We do not want your kind here poisoning our streets and corrupting our children." "I just need to rest," Evangeline said, her voice hoarse from crying. "Please, I will move along soon." "You will move along now," the woman said, and she raised her parasol as if she might strike Evangeline with it. "Go back to whatever den of sin you crawled out from. We have no place for whores here." "I am not," Evangeline started, but the words died in her throat. What was the point? They had already decided what she was. Nothing she said would change their minds. She pushed herself to her feet, swaying with exhaustion and hunger. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel the sweat soaking through her already filthy dress. She needed water. She needed food. She needed somewhere to go before nightfall, or she would be sleeping in an alley, vulnerable to anyone who might happen by. Evangeline started walking toward the edge of town, her vision swimming slightly. Maybe she could find work at one of the ranches outside Silver Ridge. Maybe someone out there would be less concerned with her virtue and more concerned with whether she could cook or clean or do laundry. It was a slim hope, but it was all she had left. She had made it perhaps half a mile past the last building when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching from behind. She moved to the side of the dusty road, not looking back, expecting the wagon to simply pass her by like everyone else had. But instead, she heard the driver pull the horses to a stop. "You look like you could use some help," a deep voice said. Evangeline turned slowly, squinting up at the man on the wagon seat. He was enormous, easily the largest man she had ever seen, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a leather cord. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were a startling blue, clear and direct, and they held no judgment, only concern. "I am fine," she lied, because she had learned not to trust men, especially not men who looked as powerful and dangerous as this one did. "You are not fine," he said bluntly. "You are about to fall over. When did you last eat?" "That is none of your concern," Evangeline said, lifting her chin with what little pride she had remaining. The man studied her for a long moment, those blue eyes taking in her torn dress, her bruised arms, her tangled hair. "You are the woman the marshal brought in from the Garrett gang." It was not a question, but Evangeline nodded anyway. There was no point in denying it. The whole territory probably knew her story by now, knew her shame. "I heard what happened," the man said. "I heard how they took you. That was not your fault." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. Evangeline felt tears spring to her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. "The town does not see it that way." "The town is full of fools," the man said. He climbed down from the wagon with surprising grace for someone so large, and Evangeline took an involuntary step backward. He stopped immediately, holding up his hands. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Nathaniel Hawk. Most people call me Nate. I have a cabin up in the mountains about 10 miles from here. I came to town for supplies, and now I'm heading back. You can come with me if you want. I can give you food and a safe place to sleep, and tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." "Why would you help me?" Evangeline asked suspiciously. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Nate said simply. "I just do not like seeing someone suffer when I could help. But if you would rather take your chances out here alone, that is your choice. I will not force you." Evangeline looked back toward Silver Ridge, then ahead down the empty road. She had no prospects, no friends, no options. This man could be dangerous, could be worse than the outlaws who had taken her before. But something in his eyes, something in the straightforward way he spoke, made her want to trust him. "I will come with you," she said quietly. "But I need you to understand that I have nothing to offer you in return. No money, no skills worth mentioning, nothing." "I did not ask for anything in return," Nate said. He gestured toward the wagon. "Can you climb up, or do you need help?" "I can manage," Evangeline said, though in truth she was not entirely sure. Her legs felt like water, and her head was spinning. She reached for the wagon wheel, trying to pull herself up, but her strength failed her. She would have fallen if Nate had not caught her, his large hands gentle on her waist as he lifted her effortlessly onto the wagon seat. "Thank you," she whispered, mortified by her weakness. "No need for thanks," Nate said. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to set the horses moving. "We will be at the cabin in about 2 hours. Try to rest if you can." Evangeline wanted to stay alert, wanted to keep her guard up, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. The steady rocking of the wagon, the warm sun, and the knowledge that she was for the moment safe, all combined to pull her down into sleep. Her last conscious thought was that Nate Hawk smelled like pine trees and wood smoke, clean and wild and utterly unlike any man she had known before. When Evangeline woke, the sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. They had left the flat prairie behind and were now climbing into heavily forested mountains. The air was cooler here, fresher, and she could hear the sound of running water somewhere nearby. "Welcome back," Nate said. "We are almost there." Evangeline sat up straighter, trying to smooth her hair back from her face. "I apologize for falling asleep. That was rude of me." "You needed rest," Nate said with a shrug of those massive shoulders. "No harm done." They rounded a bend in the narrow mountain road, and Evangeline saw the cabin ahead. It was larger than she had expected, built from strong logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. There was a small barn nearby and a pen that held several goats. A creek ran past the property, its water clear and cold, looking in the late afternoon light. "You built all this yourself?" Evangeline asked, unable to hide her amazement. "Over the past 5 years," Nate said. "I came up here after the war. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere away from people and their troubles. I trap in the winter, sell furs in the spring, hunt and fish and grow what I need. It is a simple life, but it suits me." He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin and jumped down, then came around to help Evangeline. This time, she let him lift her down without protest, too tired and overwhelmed to maintain her pride. Her feet touched the ground, but she swayed again, and Nate kept his hands on her waist to steady her. "Easy," he said. "Let me get you inside and get some food into you. Everything else can wait." The interior of the cabin was neat and surprisingly comfortable. There was a large stone fireplace, a sturdy wooden table with 2 chairs, a bed built into one corner with what looked like a soft feather mattress, and shelves lined with books and supplies. Everything was clean and well-maintained, showing a level of care she had not expected from a man living alone in the mountains. Nate guided her to one of the chairs and went to stir up the fire. "I have stew left from yesterday. It will only take a few minutes to heat." Evangeline watched him move around the cabin with easy competence, his movements economical and practiced. He hung a pot over the fire, added wood to build up the flames, then poured water from a bucket into a basin. He brought the basin to her along with a cloth. "You can wash up while the food heats," he said. "I will step outside and tend to the horses." He left before she could thank him, giving her privacy without her having to ask for it. Evangeline looked down at her hands, crusted with dirt and dried blood, and felt shame wash over her. She dipped the cloth in the water and began to wash, scrubbing at her skin until it hurt, wishing she could wash away everything that had happened as easily as she could wash away the dirt. By the time Nate returned, she had cleaned her face and hands as best she could. He ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls and set one in front of her along with a spoon and a thick slice of bread. "Eat slowly," he advised. "You will make yourself sick if you eat too fast after going hungry." Evangeline tried to follow his advice, but the food was so good, so warm and filling, that she could barely restrain herself. The stew was thick with meat and vegetables, seasoned with herbs she could not identify. The bread was fresh and hearty. She ate every bite, then looked up to find Nate watching her with satisfaction. "Better?" he asked. "Much better," Evangeline admitted. "Thank you. For everything. I do not know why you are being kind to me, but I'm grateful." "You do not need to thank me every 5 minutes," Nate said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I did what anyone decent would do." "The people in Silver Ridge would disagree with you," Evangeline said bitterly. "Like I said, they are fools." Nate pushed back from the table and went to a chest in the corner. He pulled out a bundle of clothing and brought it to her. "These belong to my sister. She passed a few years back, but I kept some of her things. They should fit you well enough. There's a screen in the corner if you want privacy to change, and I will heat water so you can have a proper bath." "Your sister?" Evangeline said, holding the clothes carefully. They were simple but clean, a work dress and a nightgown, along with fresh undergarments. "Sarah," Nate said, and his voice held old grief. "She lived with me for a while after her husband died. This place was good for her, peaceful. But she got sick 2 winters ago, and there was nothing I could do. I buried her on the hillside overlooking the creek. She loved that spot." "I am sorry," Evangeline said softly. Nate nodded, then turned away to busy himself with heating water. Evangeline took the clothes behind the screen and changed quickly, peeling off the ruined dress that had marked her as shameful. The dress Nate had given her was soft from many washings, and it fit reasonably well, only a little loose in the waist. She emerged from behind the screen feeling more human than she had in months. Nate had filled a large wooden tub with hot water and set it near the fire. "Take as long as you need," he said. "I will be outside checking on the animals. There is soap on the shelf." Once again he left without waiting for thanks, and Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes at his thoughtfulness. She had expected cruelty or indifference from the world, but this strange mountain man was offering her kindness without asking for anything in return. It was almost too much to comprehend. She sank into the hot water with a sigh of relief, feeling the heat soak into her aching muscles. She scrubbed herself thoroughly, washing away weeks of dirt and fear and shame. She washed her hair 3 times, working out the tangles with her fingers until it finally felt clean again. By the time she climbed out of the tub, the water was gray and cold, but she felt renewed, transformed. She found a comb on the shelf and worked through her hair, sitting by the fire to let it dry. Her hair was long and dark, falling nearly to her waist when it was down. She had always been proud of her hair before everything happened, and it felt good to take care of it again, to reclaim this small part of herself. When Nate returned, full darkness had fallen outside. He took in her appearance with a quick glance, then nodded. "You look better. How do you feel?" "Tired," Evangeline admitted, "but better. Thank you for the bath. That was a luxury I did not expect." "You can take the bed," Nate said, gesturing toward the corner. "I will sleep in my bedroll by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Evangeline protested. "You have already done so much." "The bed is softer, and you need the rest more than I do," Nate said in a tone that brooked no argument. "I'm used to sleeping on the ground. One night by the fire will not hurt me." Evangeline wanted to argue further, but she was too exhausted. She made her way to the bed and lay down, pulling the heavy quilt over herself. The mattress was indeed soft, and the pillow smelled like pine and fresh air. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Nate bank the fire and spread out his bedroll. Even in the dim light, she could see the play of muscles in his arms and back as he moved. He was built like someone who worked hard every day, all lean strength and power. "Nate?" she said quietly. "Yeah?" He looked over at her, his face shadowed in the firelight. "What happens tomorrow?" Tomorrow we figure out what you want to do, Nate said. If you want to go back to Silver Ridge and try again, I will take you. If you want to go to a different town, I can help with that too. Or if you want to stay here for a while until you figure things out, that is also fine. The choice is yours. Just like that? Evangeline said. You would let me stay here? I have the room, Nate said simply. And I could use the help if you are willing to work. The garden needs tending. The goats need milking. There is always cooking and cleaning and mending to be done. If you are willing to do your share, you are welcome to stay as long as you need. You do not even know me, Evangeline whispered. I know enough, Nate said. I know you have had something terrible happen to you through no fault of your own. I know the town turned its back on you when you needed help. I know you are alone and scared and trying to survive. That is enough for me. Evangeline felt tears slip down her cheeks, silent and hot. I do not understand why you are being kind to me. Because someone should be, Nate said quietly. Now get some rest. We can talk more in the morning. Evangeline closed her eyes, but sleep did not come immediately. She lay in the darkness, listening to the crackle of the fire and the sound of Nate's breathing as he settled into his bedroll. She kept waiting for him to change his mind, to show his true intentions, to reveal that his kindness was just another trap. But he did nothing except sleep, and eventually her exhaustion won out, and she drifted off into the first peaceful sleep she had known in months. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin windows and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Evangeline sat up, disoriented for a moment, before remembering where she was. Nate was at the stove cooking breakfast, already dressed for the day in worn trousers and a chambray shirt that stretched tight across his broad shoulders. Morning, he said without turning around. I hope you are hungry. I made extra. Evangeline pushed back the quilt and stood, smoothing down her borrowed nightgown. What time is it? About 8, Nate said. I let you sleep in. You needed it. He brought breakfast to the table, bacon, eggs, fried potatoes, and thick slices of toasted bread with butter and honey. Evangeline sat down and stared at the food, overwhelmed again by his generosity. I'm not used to this, she said quietly. Used to what? Nate asked, taking the seat across from her. Someone taking care of me, being kind without wanting something in return. Nate's expression softened. The world should have been kinder to you. I'm just trying to even the balance a little. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Evangeline found herself stealing glances at Nate, studying this man who had so unexpectedly become her rescuer. In the morning light, she could see the small scars on his hands and arms, marks of hard work and harder living. His face was strong and weathered, probably in his late 20s or early 30s, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned, despite the serious expression he usually wore. You said you were in the war, Evangeline asked tentatively. Union Army, Nate confirmed. Fought all the way through from 61 to 65. Saw more death and destruction than any man should see in a lifetime. When it was over, I could not go back to civilization. Everything felt too loud, too crowded, too full of people who did not understand what we had been through. So I came out here, found this spot, and built a life where I could have some peace. Do you ever get lonely? Nate considered the question. Sometimes. But I prefer being lonely to being around people who make me feel worse. I go to town every month or so for supplies, and that is enough society for me. I was supposed to be a teacher, Evangeline said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I was traveling to Cheyenne to start a position at a school there. I was so excited. I had finally earned enough money to pay for the stagecoach fare, and I thought I was going to have a real future, a real life. And then the Garrett gang attacked, and they killed the driver and the other passengers. And they took me, and everything just ended. Her voice broke on the last word, and she put her hand over her mouth, trying to hold back the sob that wanted to escape. Nate reached across the table and rested his large hand over her smaller one, his touch gentle despite his obvious strength. It did not end, he said firmly. What happened to you was terrible and wrong, but it did not end your life. You are still here, you are still you, no matter what anyone says, and you can still have a future, still have a life worth living. It will just be different from what you planned. "The town called me a whore," Evangeline whispered. "They said I was ruined, that I had no virtue left. They said I was worthless." "They were wrong," Nate said, his voice hard with anger. "What happened to you does not define your worth. You survived something horrible. That takes strength and courage, not weakness. Anyone who cannot see that is a fool." Evangeline looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his blue eyes, and felt something shift inside her. For the first time since her capture, she felt a tiny flicker of hope, a small voice that whispered, maybe things could be all right after all. "I want to stay," she said suddenly. "If your offer was genuine, I want to stay here and work for my keep. I do not want to go back to Silver Ridge, and I am not ready to face another town yet. I need time to heal, to figure out who I am now. If you will let me stay, I promise I will work hard and earn my place." "You do not have to earn anything," Nate said. "But if staying here helps you feel more secure, then stay as long as you need. I meant what I said last night. I can use the help, and I would welcome the company." Relief flooded through Evangeline, so intense it made her dizzy. She had a place to go, somewhere safe to recover and rebuild herself. It was more than she had dared to hope for. After breakfast, Nate showed her around the property. The garden was impressive, with rows of vegetables growing in neat lines: tomatoes, beans, squash, carrots, potatoes, and herbs. There was a small orchard with apple and pear trees, and berry bushes along the creek. The goats were friendly and curious, nosing at Evangeline's hands looking for treats. "The goats give milk, which I turn into cheese," Nate explained. "The chickens give eggs. I hunt deer and elk for meat, catch fish from the creek. I am mostly self-sufficient up here, only going to town for things like flour and sugar and coffee that I cannot make myself." "It is beautiful here," Evangeline said, looking around at the mountains rising on all sides, the tall pines, the crystal-clear sky. "Peaceful." "It is," Nate agreed, "and safe. No one comes up here unless I invite them. You do not have to worry about anyone from town bothering you." He taught her how to milk the goats, his hands patient and sure as he showed her the proper technique. He introduced her to the chickens and showed her where they liked to lay their eggs. He walked her through the garden, pointing out which plants needed water and which ones were ready to harvest. By lunchtime, Evangeline's head was spinning with new information, but she felt useful for the first time in months. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Evangeline woke early to help with the morning chores, milking the goats and collecting eggs while Nate tended to the horses and checked his trap lines. They had breakfast together, then spent the day working on various tasks around the property. Evangeline cooked and cleaned and did laundry, tended the garden and helped preserve food for the coming winter. Nate chopped wood, made repairs to the cabin and barn, hunted for meat, and taught Evangeline how to do things she had never learned growing up in town: how to churn butter, how to smoke fish, how to identify edible plants in the forest. They talked while they worked, sharing stories from their pasts. Nate told her about growing up on a farm in Pennsylvania, about his parents and siblings, about the horrors of the war and the friends he had lost. Evangeline told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her parents who had died from fever when she was 16, about her struggle to make her own way in the world as a young woman alone. "I was always good at reading and learning," she said one afternoon as they worked together in the garden, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants. "My mother taught me when I was young, and I loved it. After she died, I worked as a seamstress, but I spent all my free time reading whatever books I could borrow. When I heard about the teaching position in Cheyenne, it felt like a dream come true. A chance to do something I loved and make a decent living at the same time." "You could still teach," Nate said. "Maybe not in a formal school, but there are always people who need education. Once you are ready, you could advertise your services as a tutor, or you could teach children on nearby ranches." "Maybe," Evangeline said, though she could not quite imagine it yet. The thought of facing other people still filled her with dread. As the days passed, Evangeline noticed herself starting to heal, both physically and emotionally. The bruises faded from her arms and legs. The shadows under her eyes disappeared as she got regular sleep and good food. The tight, fearful feeling in her chest began to ease, replaced by something that felt almost like contentment. She noticed other things too. She noticed the way Nate's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which was happening more often as he relaxed around her. She noticed the way his muscles flexed when he chopped wood, the easy strength with which he lifted heavy loads. She noticed how gentle his hands could be despite their size, whether he was handling a newborn goat or carefully bandaging a cut on her finger when she sliced it while cooking. She noticed, too, how safe she felt around him. He had never once made an inappropriate comment or gesture. He respected her privacy, giving her space when she needed it and company when she wanted it. He treated her like a person, not like damaged goods or a burden or an object to be used. One evening in late August, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the mountains. The air was cool and pleasant, filled with the sounds of crickets and the distant call of an owl. "I never thanked you properly," Evangeline said quietly. "You thank me constantly," Nate said with amusement. "I think you have thanked me at least twice today already." "No, I mean really thanked you." Evangeline turned to look at him. "You saved my life, Nate. Not just by taking me in and giving me food and shelter, but by treating me like a human being, by showing me that not everyone in the world is cruel or judgmental. You gave me hope when I had none left. I do not know how to repay that." "You do not need to repay it," Nate said, but his voice was softer than usual. "But if you want to know the truth, you have helped me too. This place was very quiet before you came. Too quiet sometimes. Having you here, having someone to talk to and work alongside, it has been good for me. Made me realize how much I was isolating myself." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Evangeline felt something shift between them, a deepening of their connection that went beyond simple friendship or gratitude. She found herself very aware of Nate's presence beside her, of his warmth and strength and quiet kindness. "Nate," she said hesitantly. "Yeah? Do you think I will ever feel normal again? Like a real person, not just someone broken and damaged?" Nate turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious and intent. "You are not broken, Evangeline. You are healing, and that is different. What happened to you left scars, but scars prove you survived. They prove you are stronger than what tried to destroy you. You are already a real person, and you always have been. Anyone who made you feel otherwise was wrong." Evangeline felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears this time, tears of relief and gratitude. "You are a good man, Nathaniel Hawke." "I'm just a man," Nate said quietly, "but I try to do right when I can." As summer turned to autumn, the mountains exploded with color. The aspen trees turned gold, the oak trees turned red and orange, and the air grew crisp and clear. Nate began preparing for winter, chopping extra wood and hunting larger game to preserve. Evangeline helped him smoke venison and elk meat, pickle vegetables from the garden, and store apples and pears in the root cellar. She had grown stronger over the past months, both physically and emotionally. Her arms had developed muscle from all the physical work, and her face had filled out with regular meals. She laughed more easily now, and sometimes entire days would pass without her thinking about the Garrett gang or what they had done to her. What she did think about increasingly was Nate. She had developed feelings for him, deep and undeniable, though she tried to hide them. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural result of him being kind when the world had been cruel. But she knew it was more than that. She admired his strength and his gentleness, his competence and his compassion. She loved the sound of his laughter, rare but genuine. She loved watching him work, the way he put his whole self into every task. She loved talking with him in the evenings, discussing books they had read or debating various topics with playful intensity. But she said nothing, terrified of ruining what they had. He had given her sanctuary and friendship, asking nothing in return. How could she risk that by confessing feelings he likely did not share? He had never given any indication that he saw her as anything other than a woman he was helping, a friend at most. And given what had happened to her, given her ruined reputation, why would he want her as anything more? The first snow came in early October, a light dusting that melted by afternoon. Nate stood on the porch watching it fall, his expression thoughtful. "Winter comes early up here," he said. "Once the heavy snows start, we will be snowed in for weeks at a time. Are you sure you want to stay? I could still take you to a town before the roads become impassable." Evangeline came to stand beside him, wrapping her shawl tighter against the cold. "I want to stay," she said firmly. if you will have me." "I will have you," Nate said, and something in his voice made Evangeline look up at him sharply. But he was still staring out at the falling snow, his expression unreadable. The truth was, Nate had been struggling with his own feelings for weeks. Evangeline had come into his life broken and scared, and he had wanted only to help her, to give her a safe place to heal. But somewhere along the way, his protective instincts had deepened into something more. He found himself watching for her smile, listening for her laughter. He loved the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she talked to the goats as if they could understand her, the way she fell asleep by the fire with a book in her lap when she was particularly tired. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. She was intelligent and hard-working, kind and resilient. She had been through hell and come out the other side stronger, not bitter. She made his cabin feel like a home instead of just a shelter. She made him want things he had stopped wanting years ago: companionship, partnership, family. But he said nothing, holding his feelings locked tight inside. She had been through enough without him adding his unwanted affection to her burdens. She deserved time to heal, time to figure out what she wanted from life without pressure from him. And there was every possibility that her feelings for him, if she had any at all, were born from gratitude and proximity rather than genuine affection. Once she was strong enough to rejoin the world, she would probably want to leave, to make a real life somewhere else. He would not hold her back, no matter how much it might hurt to let her go. So they danced around each other, both hiding their feelings, both afraid to speak the truth. The heavy snows came in November, just as Nate had predicted. Within a week, they were snowed in completely, the drifts piling up to the windows. Nate had to dig a path to the barn every morning to tend the animals, and the world beyond the cabin disappeared into a white blanket. Being confined to the cabin together, unable to escape outside for hours of solitary work, forced a new level of intimacy between them. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from Nate's extensive book collection, playing chess on a board he had carved himself, or simply talking about everything and nothing. One particularly cold night in late November, a fierce blizzard howled outside, shaking the cabin walls with the force of the wind. Evangeline sat by the fire, wrapped in a quilt, watching Nate add more wood to keep the flames high. "Does it frighten you?" she asked, "being so isolated? If something went wrong, if one of us got hurt or sick, there would be no help for weeks." "It used to," Nate admitted, sitting down in the chair across from her. "The first winter I spent up here, I nearly drove myself mad worrying about all the things that could go wrong. But I have learned to be careful and to trust my preparations. I have medical supplies, plenty of food, enough wood to last through 3 winters if necessary. We are as safe here as we would be anywhere." "We," Evangeline repeated softly. "I like that." Nate looked at her, and something passed between them, a moment of connection so intense it made Evangeline's breath catch. The firelight cast shadows across his face, highlighting his strong features, and she found herself wondering what it would be like to reach out and touch him, to trace the line of his jaw with her fingers. "Evangeline," Nate said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling with the words. Finally he said, "I want you to know that when spring comes, if you want to leave, if you want to go to Cheyenne or anywhere else, I will take you. I will give you money for a fresh start, letters of recommendation, whatever you need. You are not trapped here. You are free to go whenever you want." It was not what she had hoped to hear, and disappointment crashed through her. He was already planning for her departure, already thinking ahead to when she would be gone. He wanted her to know she could leave, which meant he expected her to leave, which meant he did not feel the same way she did. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thank you. That is very generous." Nate cursed softly under his breath. "That came out wrong. I'm not trying to get rid of you. I just want you to know that you have options, that you are not obligated to stay here just because I helped you." "I understand," Evangeline said, though she did not really. She stood up, still wrapped in the quilt. "I'm tired. I think I will go to bed." "Evangeline, wait," Nate started, but she was already retreating to the bed in the corner, pulling the curtain closed between them for privacy. She lay in the dark, fighting back tears, telling herself she was a fool. Of course he did not want her. Why would he? She was ruined, damaged goods, exactly what the town had said she was. He was just being kind by letting her stay, but he clearly did not want her permanently. As soon as the weather cleared, she would start making plans to leave. She could not stay here knowing her feelings were not returned, torturing herself with what could never be. On the other side of the curtain, Nate sat by the fire with his head in his hands, cursing his own stupidity. He had tried to give her reassurance and freedom, and instead, he had hurt her. He had seen the pain flash across her face before she hid it, had heard the false brightness in her voice. He was a fool. And worse, he was a coward. He should have just told her the truth, that he had fallen in love with her, that he wanted her to stay forever, that the thought of her leaving made his chest ache with anticipated loss. But the words had stuck in his throat, held back by fear. Fear that she did not feel the same way, fear that she would feel obligated to return his feelings out of gratitude, fear that he would trap her in a life she did not really want. So instead, he had said nothing meaningful at all, and now she was hurt, and he had no idea how to fix it. The next few days were awkward and strained. They were polite to each other, scrupulously so, but the easy warmth that had developed between them was gone. Evangeline threw herself into housework with fierce determination, cooking elaborate meals and cleaning things that did not need cleaning. Nate spent as much time as possible outside, even in the bitter cold, checking on the animals repeatedly and finding excuses to stay away from the cabin. It could not go on like this, and they both knew it. But neither knew how to break the impasse. The solution came from an unexpected source. A week after their uncomfortable conversation, Evangeline was in the barn milking the goats when one of them butted her hard in the side, knocking her off the stool and into the wall. She landed badly, her head striking a support beam, and everything went black. When she came to, she was back in the cabin, lying in the bed with a cold cloth on her forehead. Nate was sitting beside her, his face pale and strained with worry. "Thank God," he breathed when her eyes opened. "You have been unconscious for almost an hour. I thought—" He broke off, his jaw clenched tight. "What happened?" Evangeline asked, though her head was pounding and she felt dizzy. "Bella got startled by a mouse and knocked you into the beam," Nate said. "I heard the commotion and found you on the ground, not moving. I've never been so scared in my life." His voice cracked on the last word, and Evangeline saw genuine fear in his eyes, fear that went beyond simple concern for a friend or a helper. Her heart began to beat faster. "I'm all right," she said softly. "It will take more than a bump on the head to do me in." "You could have been seriously hurt," Nate said, and his hand came up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "You could have died, and I never would have told you." He stopped abruptly, but it was too late. The words hung in the air between them, unfinished but full of meaning. "Told me what?" Evangeline whispered. Nate closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they were full of emotion he was no longer trying to hide. "That I love you," he said simply. "That I have loved you for weeks, maybe months. That the thought of you leaving tears me apart inside. That I want you to stay, not because I need help with the chores, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Evangeline felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "You love me?" she repeated, needing to hear it again. I love you," Nate confirmed. "I know I should not. I know you have been through hell and probably do not need some mountain man declaring his feelings and complicating your life. I know I am not much of a catch, just a hermit living in the wilderness. But I cannot help how I feel. You are brave and kind and beautiful, and you make me want to be a better man. You make this cabin feel like a home. You make me feel alive in a way I have not felt since before the war." "Nate," Evangeline said, reaching up to take his hand in hers, "I love you too. I have loved you for so long, but I was afraid to say anything. I thought you just saw me as someone you were helping, someone damaged and broken who you pitied. I thought you were already planning for me to leave." "Never," Nate said fiercely. "I only offered to help you leave because I thought it was what you wanted. But what I want, what I dream about, is you staying here with me. Forever. As my wife. If you will have me." Evangeline's breath caught. "Your wife?" I know it is soon, Nate said quickly. I know you probably want time to think to be sure. But I am sure, Evangeline. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, and I want to marry you, make you my wife in every way that matters. I want to protect you and provide for you and build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Will you marry me? Joy flooded through Evangeline, so pure and strong it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you, Nate. I love you so much. Nate let out a shaky breath of relief and leaned down to press his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. Thank God, he murmured. I was so afraid you would say no. How could I say no? Evangeline said, bringing her hand up to stroke his hair, finally allowing herself to touch him the way she had wanted to for so long. You are everything I could have asked for and more. You are strong and kind and good. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. Of course I will marry you. Nate pulled back slightly, and his expression grew serious. I need you to be sure, he said, not because you are grateful or because you feel obligated, but because you truly want to be my wife, to live this life with me. It is not an easy life, Evangeline. We are isolated up here, away from society and its comforts. The winters are harsh, the work is hard. I can give you a good home and my whole heart, but I cannot give you fancy dresses or theater performances or any of the things you might have had in a city. I do not want those things, Evangeline said firmly. I want you. I want this life we have been building together. I want this cabin in the mountains, the garden and the goats, the quiet evenings by the fire. I want to wake up beside you and work beside you and sleep beside you. That is enough for me. More than enough. It is everything. Are you sure? Nate asked one more time, and Evangeline answered by pulling him down and kissing him. It was their first kiss, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Nate's lips were warm and soft, and he kissed her with reverence, as if she were something precious and fragile. Evangeline melted into it, feeling safe and loved and desired all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Nate rested his forehead against hers again. I love you, he whispered. I love you too, Evangeline whispered back. They decided to wait until spring to have a proper wedding, partly because travel was impossible in the winter, and partly because Evangeline wanted to marry Nate surrounded by the beauty of the mountains in bloom. But in their hearts, they considered themselves married from that moment on. Nate moved his bedroll to share the bed with Evangeline, and they held each other through the long winter nights, talking and kissing and slowly learning each other's bodies with gentle exploration. Nate was patient and careful with Evangeline, understanding that her experiences with the outlaws had left her with fears and trauma. He let her set the pace, never pushing, always giving her control. The first few times they tried to be intimate, she panicked, and he immediately stopped, holding her and soothing her until she felt safe again. We have all the time in the world, he told her. There is no rush. We will only do what feels right for you. His patience and understanding helped Evangeline heal in ways she had not thought possible. Slowly, over many nights, she learned to trust him completely, to understand that intimacy could be loving and gentle instead of violent and painful. When they finally came together completely as husband and wife, it was in the deep cold of January, with snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling in the hearth. Nate made love to her with tenderness and passion, showing her with his body what his words had already proven, that she was cherished, desired, loved beyond measure. Afterward, Evangeline lay in his arms, feeling whole for the first time since her ordeal began. I never thought I could feel this way again, she whispered, safe, happy, loved. You will feel this way every day for the rest of your life, Nate promised, kissing her forehead. I will make sure of it. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing the muddy ground beneath. Crocuses pushed up through the soil, followed by wildflowers of every color. The creek swelled with snowmelt, rushing and bubbling over the rocks. Birds returned from their southern migrations, filling the air with song. And through it all, Nate and Evangeline worked side by side, preparing for their wedding and their future together. Nate made the trip to Silver Ridge in early April, returning with supplies and news. "I told them we are getting married," he said as he unpacked the wagon. "Caused quite a stir." "I imagine it did," Evangeline said wryly. "The ruined woman marrying the hermit mountain man. That must have given them something to gossip about." "Let them gossip," Nate said with a shrug. "I also talked to the circuit preacher. He agreed to come up here in May to perform the ceremony. And I bought you something." He handed her a wrapped package, and Evangeline opened it to find a beautiful dress, simple but well made, in a soft cream color. There was also a length of lace for a veil and a pair of new boots. "Nah, Nate," she breathed, "this must have cost a fortune." "Worth every penny," Nate said, pulling her close. "You deserve to have a proper wedding dress, to feel beautiful on our wedding day. Although you are beautiful to me every day, even in your work clothes with dirt on your nose." Evangeline laughed and kissed him. "Thank you. For everything. For loving me. For choosing me. For giving me a life I never dreamed I could have." "Thank you for saying yes," Nate replied. "For trusting me. For loving me back. For making me happier than I have ever been." They set the wedding date for the third Saturday in May, when the wildflowers would be at their peak and the weather would be reliable. Nate invited a few people he trusted from nearby ranches, people who had known his sister and who had no connection to Silver Ridge or its judgmental population. Evangeline invited no one, having no family or friends left in the territory, but she did not mind. This wedding was about joining her life to Nate's, not about impressing anyone or following society's expectations. The day before the wedding, Nate took Evangeline to the hillside where his sister Sarah was buried. The grave was well tended, marked with a simple wooden cross surrounded by wildflowers. "I wanted you to meet her in a way," Nate said. "Sarah was the kindest person I ever knew. She would have liked you very much, and she would have been happy that I found someone to love." Evangeline placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave and stood in silence for a moment. "Thank you for watching over your brother," she said softly. "I promise I will take good care of him." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the sky a brilliant blue, the mountains majestic in their spring glory. The circuit preacher arrived at noon, along with 3 families from nearby ranches. They set up the ceremony in the meadow near the cabin, surrounded by wildflowers and the sound of the rushing creek. Evangeline got ready in the cabin with the help of Mrs. Patterson, the wife of a rancher who had known Nate for years. The older woman was kind and matter-of-fact, helping Evangeline into her dress and arranging the lace veil in her hair. "You're making a good choice," Mrs. Patterson said as she worked. "Nate Hawk is one of the finest men I know. He will treat you right." "I know," Evangeline said, smiling. "I am the luckiest woman alive." When she stepped out of the cabin, she saw Nate waiting for her in the meadow, and her breath caught at the sight of him. He wore a new suit, probably purchased on the same trip where he bought her dress, and his long hair was neatly tied back. But it was his expression that made her heart skip. He was looking at her as if she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, his eyes shining with love and pride. She walked to him through the wildflowers, her hand held by Mr. Patterson, who had agreed to give her away. When she reached Nate, he took her hands in his and smiled down at her. "You are so beautiful," he whispered. "So are you," she whispered back, and he laughed, the sound warm and happy. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and cherish each other through good times and bad, through all the years that lay ahead. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nate kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they had an audience, and Evangeline kissed him back with all the love in her heart. The small group celebrated with a feast that Nate and Evangeline had prepared, everyone contributing food and stories and laughter. As the sun began to set, their guests departed, heading back to their own homes and lives, leaving Nate and Evangeline alone at last. "Well, Mrs. Hawk," Nate said, pulling her into his arms, "how does it feel to be married?" "Perfect," Evangeline said, resting her head against his chest. "Everything feels perfect." They stood together watching the sun set over the mountains, the sky turning shades of pink and gold and purple. Evangeline thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the pain and fear and loss. If someone had told her a year ago that she would end up married to a mountain man, living in a cabin in the wilderness, She would have thought they were insane. But now she could not imagine any other life, any other future. "What are you thinking about?" Nate asked, stroking her hair. "How grateful I am," Evangeline said. "How everything terrible that happened led me to you, to this life. I would not change it, Nate. Even if I could go back and avoid being captured by the outlaws, even if I could have made it safely to Cheyenne and become a teacher, I would not change it. Because then I never would have met you." "I feel the same way," Nate said quietly. "The war was hell, and losing Sarah nearly broke me. But all of it led me here, to you. That makes it worth something." They went inside as full darkness fell, and Nate built up the fire while Evangeline changed out of her wedding dress into her nightgown. They made love slowly and sweetly, taking their time, celebrating their marriage with their bodies as well as their hearts. Afterward, they lay tangled together, warm and satisfied, and completely content. "I'm going to make you so happy," Nate promised, kissing her forehead. "You already do," Evangeline said, snuggling closer. "Every single day." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Evangeline's life. She and Nate worked together, played together, loved each other with increasing depth and passion. They expanded the garden, added to the herd of goats, and made improvements to the cabin. Nate built a larger bed to accommodate his size more comfortably and added shelves for Evangeline's growing collection of books. She made curtains for the windows and embroidered pillows for the chairs, making the cabin feel even more like a home. In July, a group of women from Silver Ridge made the journey up to the cabin, led by the mayor's wife. Evangeline's first instinct was to hide, to avoid facing the people who had judged her so harshly. But Nate stood beside her on the porch, his solid presence giving her courage, and she faced the women with her head held high. "We have come to apologize," the mayor's wife said stiffly. "We were wrong about you, Mrs. Hawk. We should have shown Christian charity instead of judgment. We hope you can forgive us." Evangeline studied the women, seeing genuine remorse on some faces and mere social obligation on others. "What changed your minds?" she asked. "We heard how happy you and Mr. Hawk are together," one of the younger women said, "and we realized that we had been cruel to someone who was suffering through no fault of her own. It has been weighing on our consciences." Evangeline felt Nate's hand settle on her shoulder, a silent offer of support. She thought about holding a grudge, about sending these women away with sharp words. But what good would that do? She was happy now, truly happy, and their opinions no longer had the power to hurt her. I forgive you," she said quietly. "But I hope that in the future, you will think twice before judging someone based on circumstances beyond their control. You never know what someone has endured or how they are suffering inside." The women nodded, relief visible on their faces. They left shortly after, and Evangeline turned to Nate with a wry smile. "Well, that was unexpected." "You handled it well," Nate said, pulling her close. "I'm proud of you." "I meant what I said," Evangeline told him. "Their opinions do not matter to me anymore. The only opinion that matters is yours." "And my opinion," Nate said, kissing her softly, "is that you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." By autumn, Evangeline realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she was finally certain, she could barely contain her excitement. She waited until evening, when they were sitting by the fire after dinner, to share the news. "Nate," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "we are going to have a baby." Nate's eyes widened, and then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen from him. "A baby? Truly?" "Truly," Evangeline confirmed. "Sometime in the spring, we will be parents." Nate let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. When he finally set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I'm going to be a father," he said in wonder. "We are going to have a family." "We are already a family," Evangeline said, cupping his face in her hands. "But yes, we are going to expand it. Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Nate said, kissing her thoroughly. "I love you so much. Thank you for this gift, for everything you have given me." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Nate was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly worried about Evangeline's health and safety. He tried to stop her from doing any heavy work, but she insisted on maintaining her normal routine, at least until her growing belly made certain tasks too difficult. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him with exasperation after he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years, Nate. I will be fine." "I know," he said, looking sheepish. "I just worry. I cannot help it." "Worry less, help more," Evangeline suggested with a smile. "If you want to be useful, you can rub my feet. They are killing me lately." Nate eagerly complied, and foot rubs became a nightly ritual, along with him reading aloud to her and the baby while his large hand rested on her growing stomach. Winter came again, and they were once more snowed in, but this time it felt different. This time they were preparing for a new life, building a cradle and sewing baby clothes and choosing names. They talked about their hopes and dreams for their child, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they would build together. In March, when the snow was beginning to melt and the first hints of spring were appearing, Evangeline went into labor. Nate had arranged for Mrs. Patterson to come stay with them for a few weeks around the due date, and the older woman proved invaluable, guiding them through the process with calm expertise. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Nate stayed by Evangeline's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed at him through the pain. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their baby was born. A healthy, squalling boy with a thick shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Nate cried when Mrs. Patterson placed the baby in his arms, tears streaming down his face as he stared at his son with wonder and awe. "He is perfect," he whispered, "absolutely perfect." "Let me see him," Evangeline said, exhausted but glowing with joy. Nate carefully transferred the baby to her arms, and she gazed down at her son with overwhelming love. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "We have been waiting so long to meet you." They named him Daniel, after Nate's father, and he was everything they could have hoped for. He was a healthy, happy baby who loved to eat and sleep and be held. Nate was a devoted father from the start, taking over many of the household chores so Evangeline could rest and recover. He changed diapers and walked the floor with Daniel when he fussed, and sang lullabies in his deep, rumbling voice that always put the baby to sleep. "You are a natural at this," Evangeline told him one night, watching him rock Daniel by the fire. "I had a lot of younger siblings," Nate said with a smile. "I helped raise most of them after our mother got sick. I always wanted children of my own, but I never thought it would happen. I had accepted that I would live alone up here for the rest of my life. And then you came along and changed everything." "We changed everything together," Evangeline corrected. "You gave me a reason to live again, a reason to hope. And now we have this beautiful boy, this perfect little family." As Daniel grew, he proved to be a happy child, full of curiosity and energy. He had his father's sturdy build and his mother's quick mind, and he loved everything about mountain life. Nate taught him to fish and track animals, to identify plants and trees. Evangeline taught him to read and write, starting his education young. They read to him constantly, filling his mind with stories and knowledge. When Daniel was 3, Evangeline became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the autumn of 1876, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Nate's beloved sister. Sarah was tiny and delicate, with Evangeline's dark hair and Nate's blue eyes, and she had both her parents wrapped around her little finger from the moment she was born. Daniel was initially skeptical of his new sister, but he soon became fiercely protective of her, following his father's example. Nate watched his children play together with a contentment he had never imagined possible, and Evangeline felt her heart overflow with gratitude for the life they had built. 2 years later, they had another son, whom they named James. James was quieter than his siblings, more thoughtful, but just as loved. Their family was complete, and the cabin rang with the sounds of children's laughter and play. Over the years, they made occasional trips to nearby towns for supplies and to let the children experience society, but they always returned to their mountain home with relief. The cabin had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a loft added for the children's sleeping area and a larger table to seat everyone. The garden had grown, as had the herd of goats and the flock of chickens. They were self-sufficient and happy, needing little from the outside world. When Daniel turned 18, he announced his intention to stay on the mountain and build his own cabin nearby. "This is where I belong," he said simply. "This is home." Nate clasped his son's shoulder with pride, and Evangeline felt tears of joy. Their children had grown up strong and capable, grounded in the values they had tried to instill: kindness, hard work, respect for the land, and love for family. Sarah eventually married a young rancher she met in town, but they built their home close enough that she could visit regularly. James became a teacher, fulfilling the dream that Evangeline had once held for herself, establishing a small school that served the children of local ranches and settlements. As the years passed and their hair turned gray, Nate and Evangeline would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset over the mountains they loved, surrounded by the family they had created. They would hold hands and remember that day so long ago, when Nate had found Evangeline broken and defeated on the road outside Silver Ridge, and how their chance meeting had blossomed into a love that transformed both their lives. "Do you ever regret it?" Nate asked one evening, when they were both in their 60s and their grandchildren were playing in the meadow below. "Staying here, living this isolated life? You could have gone to the city, become a teacher, had a different life entirely." "Never," Evangeline said firmly, squeezing his hand. "This is the life I was meant to have. You are the man I was meant to love. Everything that happened, all the pain and suffering, it brought me to you. It brought me home. How could I ever regret that?" "I love you," Nate said, as he had said countless times over the years, "more than anything in this world." "I love you too," Evangeline replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "Always and forever." They sat in peaceful silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, listening to their grandchildren's laughter echo through the valley. The world had changed dramatically since that day in 1872 when their story began, but their love had remained constant, a steady foundation through all the years and all the challenges they had faced. When Nate passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, Evangeline mourned him deeply, but without despair. They had been blessed with 45 years together, years filled with love and laughter and family. She lived another 5 years after his death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, passing on stories of their life together and the lessons they had learned. On the day she died, at the age of 72, her children buried her beside Nate on the hillside overlooking the creek next to his sister Sarah. The three graves stood together, surrounded by wildflowers, a testament to lives well lived and love that transcended death. Their children and grandchildren continued to live in the mountains, carrying on the legacy of hard work, kindness, and love that Nate and Evangeline had established. The original cabin remained standing for generations, preserved as a reminder of where it all began, where two broken people found each other and built something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. And sometimes, on clear evenings when the sun set in brilliant colors over the mountains, people would swear they could see two figures sitting on the cabin porch, holding hands and watching the sunset together, their love eternal and unbreakable, a true Wild West romance that had defied all odds and created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The story of the ruined woman and the mountain man who made her his wife became a legend in the territory, told and retold around campfires and dinner tables. But for those who knew them, for their children and grandchildren, it was not just a story. It was the truth of two remarkable people who had found each other in the darkest of times and built a life filled with light and love and hope. In the end, that was their greatest legacy. Not the land they tamed or the children they raised, but the proof that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that kindness could transform lives, and that two people, despite all the odds against them, could build a happily ever after that lasted beyond a lifetime. Their love story proved that being labeled as ruined meant nothing when you found someone who saw your true worth, that judgment from others was powerless in the face of genuine love and acceptance, and that sometimes the greatest adventures came not from seeking them out, but from opening your heart to the unexpected person who crossed your path when you needed them most. The mountain remained, standing tall and proud over the valley where Nate and Evangeline had built their life together. The creek still rushed over the rocks, the wildflowers still bloomed each spring, and the cabin still stood as a monument to their love. And though they were gone, their story lived on, inspiring others to be kind, to look past surface judgments, to believe that love could conquer even the hardest circumstances and create something beautiful and lasting. Years later, when Daniel was an old man himself, he would bring his own grandchildren to the cabin and tell them stories of their ancestors. He would tell them about how his father had saved his mother when the whole world had turned its back on her, how they had built a life based on mutual respect and deep love, how they had proven that what others thought did not matter when two people truly committed to each other. Remember, he would tell the children, that kindness matters more than judgment, that love is stronger than hate, and that everyone deserves a second chance. That is what your great-grandparents taught me, and it is the most important lesson I can pass on to you. And the children would listen, wide-eyed and attentive, absorbing the story of Nate and Evangeline, the mountain man and the ruined woman who had defied society's expectations and created a love story for the ages. They would carry that story forward into the future, ensuring that the legacy of kindness, acceptance, and unwavering love would continue long after the last person who remembered them personally had passed away. In this way, Nate and Evangeline achieved a form of immortality, not through fame or fortune, but through the values they lived by and the love they shared. Their story became part of the fabric of the mountain itself, woven into its history as surely as the rocks and trees and streams. And as long as the mountain stood, as long as people told stories about the Wild West and the brave souls who tamed it, the tale of the mountain man who saw past society's judgment to the beautiful soul beneath, and the ruined woman who found redemption and happiness in his arms would continue to be told. It was a story of hope in the face of despair, of love conquering fear and prejudice, of two people who were meant to find each other despite all the obstacles in their path. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that no one is truly ruined, that everyone deserves compassion and a chance to start over, and that the greatest love stories often begin in the most unexpected ways. And that, in the end, was the true legacy of Nathaniel Hawk and Evangeline Hawk. A love that changed lives, inspired generations, and proved that even in the harsh reality of the Wild West, true love could not only survive but thrive, creating a happily ever after that was more beautiful than any fairy tale because it was real, hard-won, and absolutely true.